Good evening and welcome to Jewish Insights on the holiday of Purim. The holiday of Purim, the story of Purim, is a fantastic one. It teaches us many really interesting lessons, and today we're going to focus on a super fundamental one of the lessons, and that is, what is the most important part of the holiday, of the story? What is the most important, vital part of the Megillah? We will begin with reviewing the story of Purim, and we'll read it kind of quickly so that we don't spend too much time on it, and then we'll get involved in this major question and the lesson that's going to emerge from this point of what's the most important part of the Megillah. This lesson is going to shake your very foundation of how you engage Jewishly. Are you ready to be shaken? Excellent. Okay, now to read off the first 4 pages, section A, Reb Shmuel, can you please read for us the story of Purim in short, the entire thing?
King Achashverosh held a banquet in the capital city of Shushan and ordered his queen Vashti to come before his guests. She refused to appear and lost her royal position. Acting on advice from his counselors, Achashverosh had women from all over the kingdom brought to him so he could choose a new queen. Esther, a young Jewish woman from Shushan, was chosen. However, following the advice of her cousin Mordechai, who raised her after her parents died, Esther did not reveal her Jewish origins to the king. Mordechai often sat near the gate of the king's palace. One day he overheard 2 men, Bigsan and Sheresh, plotting to kill the king. Mordechai reported what he had heard to Esther. She then reported the information to the king. The matter was investigated and found to be true, and Bigsan and Sheresh were put to death. Mordechai's deed was recorded in the king's chronicles. Meanwhile, the king's evil advisor, Haman, demanded that all bow down to him. Because Jews do not bow down to anyone but God, Mordechai refused to bow down to Haman. Upon learning that Mordechai was Jewish, Haman decided to kill all the Jews in the Persian Empire. He plotted to kill them, convincing King Achashverosh to go along with the plan to cast Purim, lots, plural of pur, a kind of lottery to determine the day on which he would carry out his evil deed, the 13th of Adar. When Mordechai discovered the decree, he took to the streets in mourning clothes, and all the Jews in Persia fasted. Esther turned to the king and asked for a feast with him and Haman. At the end of the feast, Haman saw Mordechai refuse to bow down again, and on the advice of his wife Zeresh, he erected huge gallows upon which to hang Mordechai. That night, the king couldn't sleep. He asked to be read from the royal book of Chronicles and came across the story about Mordechai saving the king. The king asked Haman how to honor a man whom the king wished to honor, and Haman, who thought the king was talking about him, exaggerated in gestures of honor: royal clothes, the royal horse, and a procession through the city. Achashverosh asked Haman to prepare all those honors for Mordechai the Jew. Esther held a second feast in which she revealed her Jewish identity to the king, convincing him to save the Jews and foiling Haman's plot. The Jews were allowed to fight back. Haman was hanged. Mordechai received his estates and the position of royal vizier, advisor, and the Jews of Persia celebrated their salvation on the 14th of Adar, the day after they were supposed to be annihilated.
Thank you, Reb Shmuel. That was awesome. You did a great job. Did you prepare in advance?
No,
Okay, you did a great job.
I know the story though.
Okay, and you're a good story reader.
Okay.
Okay, we're moving on to section B. So we've got the story of Purim. We understand the Jews do something, and then Mordechai does something, and then the Haman pulls out a plan, and Achashverosh is going to annihilate the Jewish people, and then there is engagement, and finally it's all over. Okay, now we come to source 1 and source 2. And this is the beginning of our conversation. So let's ask, Jaime, number 1, what's your Jewish name?
Chaim Moshe.
Chaim Moshe. Okay, which one do you prefer, Chaim or Moshe, or both?
Chaim's fine.
Chaim is fine. Okay, we'll share it. So Chaim, please read for us source number 1 and then source number 2.
On that night, sleep evaded the king, and he ordered to bring the book of records, the chronicles, and they were read before the king. From where must a person read the Megillah in order to fulfill his obligation? It is taught, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, one must start to read from on that night. And the one who said that it needs to be read from on that night understands that the expression is referring to the power of the miracle, which began on that night when Achashverosh could not sleep, and therefore one must begin reading the Megillah from there.
Excellent, thank you. So, what do we have? We have the Gemara is asking a question, what's the most important part of the entire Megillah? And the Gemara answers the question. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, Balayla hahu, on that night. And we all need to figure out what is so important about Balayla hahu, on that night. Yeah, Achashverosh doesn't fall asleep. Following the literal part of the story, Achashverosh can't fall asleep, and so he says, "Bring me the book of the Chronicles." They bring him the Chronicles, and then he reads. Miraculously, he reads specifically the story of Mordechai, how Mordechai saved the king's life through snooping in on the Bigsan and Seresh affair, and so we see from there how that is the turning point. How Achashverosh recognizes the importance of Mordechai, the head of the Jews, and as such the rest of the Jews, and hopefully that leads to a miracle. It leads to an appointment and value of Mordechai, etc., etc. But we're going to flip the story and discover what is the mystical, the secret side, the Hasidic side of this whole story. And so that brings us to the Rebbe, the main miracle. Really? And let's ask Juan, can you read for us, please? The main miracle, read for us who couldn't sleep and why was God sleeping?
States, on that night, it sleep about the king. My father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, cites the custom transcribed by the Maharir, according to which the reader is supposed to raise his voice upon reading the verse, because it is the pivotal force of the miracle. Now the pivotal force of the miracle seems more reasonable to be Esther's petition and her endeavor to nullify the decree. That pivotal force of the miracle is reflected in the fact that the king couldn't sleep. Sorry.
Okay, just a moment here. So we wonder what's the main thing about Achashverosh not being able to sleep. Really, we should be focusing on how Esther makes a ploy to get her petition in front of the king, and she risks her life to do that. That seems to be a much greater miracle. She doesn't get killed, she gets away, she manages to tell a story. But in a moment, in the who couldn't sleep paragraph, we're about to drop a major point that'll really shed light on our conversation. Juan, take it away. Who couldn't sleep?
The answer to this question lies in the Midrash teaching that say that the king who couldn't sleep is referring to Hashem, the king of the universe. The pivotal force of the miracle is that Hashem couldn't sleep. However, this doesn't seem to answer the question. In fact, it raises for the question: is sleep possible for Hashem? Doesn't the verse say, "The guardian of Israel neither slumber nor sleep"?
So now we're faced by. We just said this is so major that every time it says, when there's a reference of the king couldn't sleep, it's actually a reference to Malkoi Shel Olam, the king of the universe, which is God. So we said that's major, but what's so major about that? In fact, it actually wakes up a really big question that someone should be thinking about. And that is, there is a verse that says, the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Well, if the guardian of Israel isn't sleeping, so then how do you make a correlation between Achashverosh, the king, and God? Malchus Shel Olam, the king of the universe. How do you make this correlation, and how do you say that the king of the universe is sleeping? Major question, and that question has got to be burning in your seat for you to really thrive on this question. How can we suggest that Hashem is sleeping? And of course, we understand that Hashem is watching over the Jewish people all the time. Hashem is wide awake, taking care of us. And now you're telling me he's sleeping? Oy vey. So let's take a look. Fascinatingly, throughout our tonight's curriculum, we're going to dance between a comment from the Rebbe from 1920 and a comment from the Rebbe, not 1920, 1960 and 1972. Purim 1960 and Purim 1972. So now we're going to read source number 3, a piece from Purim 5732 1972, and it goes like this. The normal state of affairs should be that in all their troubles he is troubled. When the Jewish people lack something spiritually or physically, being that every Jew, and especially the Jewish people as a whole, are God's children, like the verse says, you are children to the Lord your God, in the Hebrew, Banim atem la'Hashem Elikechem. It is obvious that when a son is in a difficult situation, his father can't sleep at all. He toils and does everything in his power to ensure that his child lacks nothing. If so, Hashem should normally never be in a state of slumber. And all the more so in the time of the Jewish people who are stuck in this painful situation of Purim. Yet here we say that the fact that Hashem couldn't sleep was a miracle, an even greater miracle than the upheaval at the end of the Purim story. Is the pivotal force of the miracle really the fact that Hashem couldn't sleep? And that's the question that the Rebbe is leaving us with over there. Usually Hashem is not able to sleep, and suddenly over here when it comes to Purim, he is sleeping and then he wakes up, and that's called a miracle? Usually Hashem is wide awake. What's the miracle in Hashem being asleep? So let's get Reb Shmuel, can you read for us please the reflection, and then read also source number 4 and 5.
Verse states, as face answers to face in water, so does one man's heart to another. On a similar note, the Baal Shem Tov famously explained the verse, the Lord is your shadow, that just as a shadow mirrors the behavior of the person, so too God is your shadow. A person is treated from above according to his behavior below. As face answers to face in water, so does one man's heart to another. The Lord is your guardian, the Lord is your shadow. He is by your right hand. Baal Shem Tov's teaching, based on the actions a Jew performs in this world, identical matters occur on high, like a person's shadow, which perfectly mirrors his movements.
Okay, so thank you, Reb Shmuel. We have 2 verses over here. Verse number 1 comes from Proverbs, and it says, "Kamaim haponim laponim kein leva odom laodom." The way a mirror, the way water reflects the visage of the person who stares into it, so also one's heart reflects the person they're engaging with. And of course, the simple understanding is when you engage with someone and you're feeling positive and bright and happy, then that person picks up on your vibes, and the opposite is true as well. Now the Rebbe has another sentence. The Rebbe quotes for us Psalms 121:5, which says, Hashem Shemrecha, Hashem Tzilcha al Yad Yaminecha, and the main word over there is the Lord is your shadow. Well, the Baal Shem Tov tells us that a shadow does exactly what the person does. In a way, it's like a reflection. Both of these quoted verses are referring to a reflection of what I do is reflected back at me. Ever heard of karma? Maybe this is a Jewish source for karma. I'm not mixing into karma. I don't know anything about it. But maybe this is a Jewish idea for that. And from here, the Rebbe is going to tell us, we're going to discover how what we are doing and what the Jewish people did during the time of Purim, Hashem came to reflect it. And that's the answer to our conversation. So let's get Chana, are you able to read, even if your camera's off, are you able to read the Rebbe, which is the next two paragraphs?
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's
Go for it. 9 and 10.
sleep is compared to exile, that part?
No. The Zohar states come.
Okay. Okay. The Zohar states, come and see, the lower physical world always stands ready to accept, but the upper world gives it only according to its standing. If there is illumination in the lower world, the upper world shines upon it as well. In simpler terms, when a person is joyful in the world below, joy shines down upon him from above, and the reverse, God forbid, is true as well.
One more paragraph.
Okay, sorry, it fell off my screen. Here it is. During the time of the Purim story, the Jewish people were, quote, asleep. Therefore, instead of the regular state in which the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps, they needed to seek methods to awaken God, so to speak.
So now we're getting a little hint to what's going on. We introduced that the biggest part of the story is that the king is sleeping, and we said, who is the king? It's Hashem. And so we turned around with a major question. We said, how can you suggest that Hashem is sleeping and suddenly Hashem wakes up? Well, the resolution is, how do you say Hashem is sleeping? Because Hashem is mirroring our behavior. Hashem is behaving back to us like we behave to him. And so what's the solution? Got to wake him up. So we're about to discover in the coming section, we're going to get a little deeper in on the what is sleep. And then in section 4, we'll hit to how do we wake up Hashem. So let's go. Section C. Chaim, can you read for us the whole page 11 and the first paragraph on 12.
Okay. All right. So sleep is compared to exile. A state of sleep in this world is a reference to exile. And the verse states, I am asleep. And the Zohar explains, I am asleep in exile. In other words, exile is comparable to a slumber. When a person is asleep, he remains complete and intact, just like a person who is awake. But his faculties, especially his intellect and emotions, do not function at all, or function only to a lesser degree. Deaf mute while asleep. To be more specific, we know that sleep begins at the moment one closes his eyes. In other words, the other limbs of the body carry no visible distinction between their awake and asleep states, which would compare to the eyes opening and closing. Now, vision is an extremely important faculty, both physical vision and intellectual vision. As the verse says, a wise person has vision in his mind, but the fool walks in darkness. When a person is unable to see or recognize the occurrences around him, he is asleep. Similarly, the power to listen and hear is, in a more refined sense, the power to discern and evaluate. As the verse says, the ear tests words. When a person lacks the ability to evaluate the difference between a good sound and a bad one, he is asleep. The same is true for all other faculties of the soul.
Awesome. Thank you. So what do we got? We have here, we have a comment on sleep, and it's going to continue. The notion is that during sleep, our being shuts down. What's the first and most obvious moment of sleep? When we close our eyes. What happens when you close your eyes? You lose your vision. I had a friend who used to say, when he was when he was dozing in class and the teacher called him out on it, He said, I'm just investigating the inside of my eyelids. Yeah, right. It's called sleeping. Right? The moment we go to sleep, the first thing that we do, the first effort that we're doing is our eyes close. Our senses are dulled, are lowered. And more than that is that when you're asleep, you lose that intellectual ability, the strength of being to discern between good and bad, between right and wrong, between what's going on. It's really hard to tell. And then add to that the next paragraph, when you're dreaming. In fact, when you dream, things go crazy. It gets chaotic. One can lose complete control and regulation of themselves. So, the next paragraph, after absurdity of dreams, the third one there, sight and sound and serving Hashem. Let's get, Chana, can you read for us again, please? Into the next page.
Which part? The absurdity of dreams?
Sight and sound, bottom of page 12 through mid-page 13.
Sight and sound. Okay. Sight and sound in serving God. How does this play out in our service of God? The Torah states, raise up your eyes and see who created these. And states likewise, hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. These refer to our intellectual vision and hearing, but also represent those physical faculties. When those faculties are lacking, when a person fails to see and hear what he should, he could experience a spiritual degeneration. That is why exile is compared to sleep. During the temple era, godliness was visible. At each festival, the people saw godliness. They witnessed the 10 miracles that took place in the temple in Jerusalem. But when the temple was destroyed, as the verse puts it, we do not see those signs. In other words, those signs, the miracles, do exist, but we do not have the capacity to perceive them.
Excellent. Thank you, Hannah. So, day and night represent two different stages in Jewish history. The periods in which the Jews were settled in the Holy Land, when we had the temple, the Beis Hamikdash, in all of its glory, that is represented by day. It's a time of sunshine. It's symbolic to the visible shine of Hashem's light. So what's night? Night is representing the time of exile. Darkness prevents a person from seeing the correct path. He's uncertain whether he's taking the correct steps. He doesn't know where he's going. He's grappling. He has no warning of any of the obstacles, any of the hitches that he might be approaching. And so that's what's happening during our current time of exile. The Jews are going on a path. We're going in our way. But it's really hard to tell what's the right thing to do right now. The direction is a bit shadowed. It's a bit dark. The path of truth is hidden from the eyes of the Jew. The main indication that a person is sleeping is when his eyes are closed. The power of sight is the most essential power in a person, referring to the sight both of the physical eyes as well as what we would call the intellectual eye. When someone says, I see you're making a mistake, I see where your mistake is. What, you really see it? You can see where the mistake is? You can see my line of thought? Rather, it's similar to what King Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, in Mishlei, chapter 2, 14, he says, a wise person has vision in his mind. Chocham einov b'roishoi. A wise person sees. He sees, but what does he see? He sees ahead. He sees what's going to come, what's going to happen. He can predict it in a way. The foolish person, he walks in the darkness. He doesn't know what's going on. Sight allows for wisdom, and darkness brings about foolishness. So this is the true meaning of exile. The ultimate exile is when it's dark, when I cannot know what the right thing is to do, when it's hard to tell how to behave in this certain circumstance. That's a moment of exile. In fact, we can have exiles within exile. When you come to a really heavy crossroads and you're not sure where to go and what to do and what choice to make. So what do? You're in a state of exile right there. That's dark. You don't know what to do. And now you have to think something up, and you have to brighten your intellectual vision so that you can find the right choice. So now that we understand what sleep is, and thus what is darkness, so let's discover when Hashem sees and hears. So let's go back to Juan. Can you read for us, please, when Hashem sees and hears, page 13.
Hashem is our shadow to speak, and since his behavior toward us reflect our own behavior, our slumber causes heavily slumber to speak. Instead of God paying attention, the eyes of Hashem upon the writers, his ears to their supplications. The eyes of Hashem are passing through the land, and instead of us witnessing our divine providence, our own personal lacking causes Hashem to receive to higher spiritual plans and seems to be asleep. In that state, divine providence might take on contradictory form. Goodness could be generated from above, but then end up in the wrong place. And instead of a behavior in which our self as the chosen people is evident, we find ourselves in a state in which the stranger among you will be promoted above you as the Torah warns.
Thank you, Juan. So, we dream during sleep. And sometimes the dreams are crazy stuff, things that couldn't happen. Sometimes it's things that happened in the past, and sometimes we're dreaming about what might happen. Even nightmares, they can shake me up, they can disturb a person, you wake up afraid. All of these things are short of the present reality. Maybe they reflect what reality might one day be, but then definitely not reality. It's a reflection. It's short of that. So is the situation in exile. It's the same thing in exile. What happens when the Jewish people can be? What happens with the Jewish people can be nothing more than a dream, and it's against the reality. How can it be that Hashem's chosen nation, the most important people, should suffer so much? How can those who have earned the name the children of Hashem go through such intense trials and tribulations? As the Baal Shem Tov said, the Jewish people are to Hashem like an only son born into a father's old age. So it's the most unrealistic absurdity that could ever happen. How can it be that Hashem is falling asleep on us? How does it happen? How does it happen that Hashem falls asleep on his only child? And the solution for this one, it's a major question, right? And it really scratches an old scab of how can bad things happen to the Jewish people, right? And it's one of those questions that no one ever has an answer for, right? And someone who does have an answer, go smack him. But in the meanwhile, we have this. We have our conversation today, which lends at least a little bit of a picture into what's going on. So let's take a look. Source number 6. Again, a quote from Purim 1972. And we're gonna see how it can all fall together. So let's get Reb Shmuel. Can you please read for us source 6? How do we find this idea in the Purim story?
When Haman convinced King Achashverosh to annihilate the Jews, there is one nation scattered among the nations who are different, and Mordecai and Esther searched for ways to abolish the decree They did not allege that Haman's accusations were a lie. Seemingly, if the goal was to abolish the decree, Esther and Mordecai should have argued that the allegations were false. The fact that they didn't do so proves that the allegations were true. The explanation. The commentaries point out that when Haman said, Yeshno am echad, there is one nation, the text should have used the more common Yesh am echad. This unique terminology alludes to the Jewish people's state of slumber. Yeshno can also be read Yashnu, they have fallen asleep. As the Talmud says, they have fallen asleep from performing commandments. A Jew must be awake. His or her heart must be alert and attentive to God, to his Torah, and to his commandments. This was Haman's allegation. There sleeps one nation. The nation which is supposed to be one and unique, chosen from among all the others, they are still here, but they have fallen asleep. This was Haman's allegation to King Achashverosh, and it was a mirror of the heavenly Haman's allegation before God, King of the universe. The Jews had fallen asleep to Jewish observance, as evidenced by their participation in the feast of Achashverosh and by the other misdeeds which brought the decree upon them. A person should be treated according to his own behavior, Haman argued. If the Jews are indifferent to God, God too must be indifferent to them. Esther did not try to refute Haman's argument, nor did Mordecai, suggesting that Haman's logic was accurate.
Okay, thank you, Reb Shmuel. You know me, I like words. So let's take a look at this fantastic play of words right here. This is the Hebrew side of the text that we've been reading. I zoomed it in so you can focus on these words. Here is the sentence from the Megillah. It says, Yeshnoi am echad mufuzar umufarad ben ha'amim. Yeshnoi means there is. How would you say this? There is, what is there? Am, a nation, echad, one nation. There is one nation. And what are they? Mufuzar, mufarad, spread out, ben ha'amim, between all of the other nations. So the question is, how do you read this sentence? So the Mefarshim tell us that instead of saying Yeshnoi am echad, it could have said Yesh am echad. So you see the difference between this and this? Here it's just Yud Shin. Here it's Yud Shin. There, what the text that's actually chosen, they add a Nun Vav. Okay, now we're going to add the Nekudos, the punctuation marks, which really change up the whole understanding. Until now, under the Yud, Yeshnoi, under the Yud you had a Segol, 3 dots, and the Vav had a dot on top of Cholam. Now, instead, the Mefarshim are rereading the text. They're making a word game on this, and they're going to change the punctuation. By the way, this is one of the reasons why in the Torah there is never going to be punctuation. You cannot write punctuation to the Torah for people who can't read, because we need to have the oral Torah to teach us how to read it. And often the rabbis learn things from variant readings of a individual word. Now, if there was specific punctuation marks in the Megillah, you would not be able to make this learning, this lesson, and we would lose the information we're looking for. Okay, so Yeshnoi is different from Yoshnu. Yoshnu means sleeping. Someone is sleeping. Who's sleeping? Yoshnu am echad, this nation is sleeping, and what are they sleeping from? Min ha mitzvahs. They're sleeping from the mitzvahs, and that, my friends, is a pretty awesome and fantastic lesson, I think, on the text. The Rebbe is teaching us, and this is of course based off of the Mefarshim. Who are the Mefarshim that we quoted? Let's just tell you. Should we tell you? Do you want to know? Gimel. It says the Radzu, as well as the Marsha, famous people, and the Yalkut Shimoni, I'm pretty sure as well. Okay, great stuff. These sources, that wasn't source number 4, by the way. This teaching is that yes, the people have fallen asleep. Mordechai and Esther come to the king Achashverosh. They don't say, hey, let's save the Jews for some other reason. They don't come and say, no, the Jews are wide awake and storming. They don't have any of that. They clearly, by their silence, agree with the message that yes, the Jewish people have fallen asleep. And mind you, what have they fallen asleep from? And how did they fall asleep? Let's think back to the story of the Megillah for the moment. In the Megillah we read how Achashverosh invites the people to come to a feast, and the Talmud tells us how Mordechai told them, don't go to the feast, it's not kosher, it's not Jewish. Yes, they'll feed you kosher food, yes, they'll feed you kosher wine, but it isn't a Jewish vibe. It's not where a Jew belongs. Yet the people went anyway. In a way, the people said, whatever, it's not so important, we'll manage, we'll do something else. There's someone more important than Hashem. That was the moment where the Jewish people verschlafen, went to sleep. And then suddenly, something happens, and the Jewish people start to stir. And that wakes up the king by reflection. So let's take a look in section number 4, section D, the alarm clock. How can we wake up Hashem? What is the trick? How do we break the cycle of us sleeping and so Hashem in his reflection is sleeping on us? How are we going to wake him up? Let's take a look. Section D. This is page, let's see, what page are we in the text? It's page 16. And let's get Reb Chaim. Can you read for us, please? How do we break the cycle of
the explanation? We have the power to awaken Hashem specifically through self-sacrifice. Being that the faculties of the body, from our vision down to the lowest faculties, are in a state of slumber, we lose the ability to govern them. They may even work against us. As Tanya says, those originating from the evil side come and attach themselves to him and inform him in his dreams of mundane affairs, and sometimes mock him and show him false things and torment him in his dreams. To overcome these issues, a person needs to reach beyond his ordinary faculties and awaken the essence of the soul. In response, instead of Hashem retreating further away and being asleep, so to speak, he wakes up. In the words of the Megillah, sleep evaded the king. He reverts to the normal state in which the guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. Earlier, we cited the verse, I am asleep, but my heart is awake. Despite the fact that we are asleep in exile, our hearts are awake. Every Jew has a Jewish essence which remains strong and whole. This is reflected in the self-sacrifice of a Jewish person, and therefore in heaven, Hashem's heart is awake as well. He is always awake. The guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps.
If I could drop in a piece of my own understanding onto this comment over here, I would say that in the last paragraph of page 16, or perhaps the bottom half, the second half of the first paragraph, something has to wake a person up in the middle of their sleep. When you're having a bad dream, what wakes you up? It's that moment of like, oh my God, this is too scary to live with. That's what wakes a guy up and says, yo, I can't handle this, I need to get up. It's that moment, it's the body's recognition that it's too dangerous to maintain the current status. That wakes the guy up. And so perhaps over here what the Rebbe is telling us is that when we hit this rock bottom, the lowest point, where we're fast asleep and it's not a good dream, then we need a pull on a much deeper part of the Jew, a much deeper part. We call this in Yiddish, it's called a pintele yid. In English we'd spell it P-I-N-T-E-L-E, pintele. Pintele, like it might, it's like the little point, the little dot, that little, eye of the needle size piece of the Jew. That little tiny drop in the neshama that's waiting for something to scratch it, and then it's going to wake up and flare. And when we access that point of the Jew, boom, we wake up. And you see on the top of page 17, The verse there is Ani yeshena v'libi er. I am asleep but my heart is awake. Even though we seem asleep, there's a piece of me that's wide awake and ready to jump into action. And the same way, every Jew has a Jewish essence which remains strong and whole. And that's, like we hear stories about the Jewish people, that when it came to a guy who was not observant at all, broke every one of the commandments and did it with enjoyment. The guy who goes to eat pork on Yom Kippur, and he does it with a thrill. It's like, when better to eat pork than on Yom Kippur? That guy, if someone comes to him and says, hey, deny you're Jewish or I'll kill you, when he's stuck between a rock and a hard spot, is that the right word? When he's stuck in this tightest spot and it's a life or death situation, something inside forces him to say, I'm Jewish and I will never, never be otherwise. And you can do anything you want, but I'm still Jewish. And that's the thing that wakes up. That's the point of the Jew, that wakes up and in reflection is strong enough to wake Hashem up. So that Hashem is more like the Hine lo yonu v'lo yishan Shem Yisrael, this guardian of Israel, neither slumbers nor sleeps. So let's take a look. Source number 7, we're quoting again from the Rebbe's Farbrengen of 1972, in which the Rebbe tells us what is the number one thing that wakes up the Jewish, that wakes up Hashem. What is that one thing that's really going to stir and scratch and wake him up? So let's get Chana. Can you read for us, please? Source number 7.
The Midrash relates, what was it that disturbed Hashem's sleep? It was the sound of the Jewish children studying Torah, young children before bar mitzvah. Ignoring the terrible situation, the Jews followed Mordechai, gathering Jewish children together to study Torah. This gave Hashem what he needed to ignore all the accusations and to wake up to their plight.
Thank you. So what is it that wakes Hashem up? What is that number one thing that wakes him up? Children studying Torah. And in fact, there is a major global activity that's done on Purim. Purim is this really busy day. And with all of the busyness of all of the good deeds that people do, we organize what we call Yeshivas Mordechai, gathering all the children in the spirit of Mordechai having gathered 10,000 children and getting them to learn Torah in public. When the government was saying we were going to kill all the Jews, nevertheless that was the moment when Mordechai says, you know what, we're going to be extra Jewish now, and we're going to do it and do it well. So it's that thing. So on Purim, in that spirit, there's often extra gatherings of children to study Torah. But that brings us to this closing comment from the Rebbe on the last page. This explains why the verse, on that night sleep evaded the king, is the pivotal moment of the miracle. Despite the slumber of the Jewish people, Hashem wakes up. This occurred because the Jewish people stood in a state of self-sacrifice. It was an entire year. By the way, it was a full year from beginning to end of the story, from when Haman decided he wants to annihilate the Jews until the date chosen. It was a full year, 12 months, 4 seasons. And during those 4 seasons, no Jew ever said, I'd rather be like everybody else and live a good life. No one was prepared to give up their Jewishness to be saved. A phenomenal thing. But it's a year of self-sacrifice. A year of rejection of idol worship, like we say in the following brackets. It's when a Jew says he's not going to serve idols, that's when he's called a Yehudi. A Jew, like the Talmud says, that when you renounce Judaism, that's when you're called a Yehudi, a Jew. The pivotal moment of the miracle was that the sleep evaded Hashem, and that caused sleep to evade King Achashverosh as well. Why did the sleep evade Hashem? Because we woke him up. To evade King Achashverosh, ultimately bringing the light, joy, and celebration and honor to the Jewish people. And As such, these days will be reenacted in every generation. The Arizal, that's what it says in the Megillah. It says, and that's these days are reenacted in every generation. The Arizal told us that by recalling and reliving those events, we actually once again channel those same blessings again. And so, by reliving these messages from the Purim story, both the literal story and the mystical story, we bring to the Jewish people, wherever they are, and in whichever state they find themselves, we will bring them oira, v'simcha, v'sasim, yikar, light, joy, celebration, and honor. And so let's review this. Let's review this from beginning to end. We started with the story of the Megillah. Then we questioned what's the main part of the Megillah that the king wakes up. So we said, hey, what's the big deal? In fact, not just what's the big deal, shocking. How can the king go to sleep altogether? Can you imagine? The king goes to sleep, but we said we have all these verses that say God is wide awake and taking care of us all the time. The response is that Hashem, in one way, reflects our behavior. When we are asleep, Hashem is sleeping. But there's a piece of us that's always awake. And if we can wake up that piece, if we can get our Pintali Yid to wake up, how do we do that? By studying Torah. Children studying Torah, and we're all children in a way because we all don't know all of Torah. We're all, in a way, children in our Torah study levels. So when we are going to wake up and study Torah and invest ourselves in God's Torah, in spite of what's going on in the world around us, that's when we wake up Hashem, and effectively we're waking up ourselves too. And when we wake up Hashem, Hashem says, yo, these guys are with me. I'm going to take care of them. I am going to watch over them and spread my all-encompassing wing of peace and light over the Jewish people. And like that, we can end with the same blessings that the Megillah ends with. That for the Jewish people there was light, joy, happiness, and celebration. And at this moment in our lives and in Jewish history, 2022, who would ever think that there could be such danger posed to Jewish people, and so many of them? We take a moment to recognize and to hope and to beg from God that in the merit of the Torah study that we just did, let God protect our brothers and sisters in Europe, not just our brothers and sisters in Europe. What about the brothers and sisters all over the world? Let God take care of us and rid us of the trouble we're in and protect us, every one of us, wherever we may be, and give us goodness, light, happiness, and good energy. Good Shabbos and sei gesund.
Amen.